Welcome everybody to our video conference for the week. Now, as you know, the theme is trying to help doctors figure out, where do I put a practice? Where should I purchase a practice or start up? Now, Dr. Demographics is fundamentally a research firm, and what we're trying to do then is to give doctors a chance to investigate locations that come up to them. This forum is really to talk about what trends that we're noting and how those trends are going to affect where to practice. We look at different places usually. We've done, in fact, this last month, South Carolina, North Carolina, Hawaii, parts of Utah. So we're trying to let you know in advance of ordering anything, what's out there and where you want to go, and answer any questions that people might have. So that being said, I'm going to share my screen and jump into this topic right away. We usually call this session "Grow and Thrive" or "Shrivel and Die." I know it's a little grim, but hey, forgive me. You're supposed to be a little entertaining, and if it's not scary, then nobody wants to pay attention to me, So what can I say? Now, here's what we're looking at. I want to talk today about the process of getting into the best place to practice. I bring it up because I had a big argument today. Well, not today, but this week with a competitor. And one of those things that we're kind of having a problem with is the philosophy that we have on how do you give doctors the information so that they can get into a practice quickly, but safely. Now, there are lots of people who can generate reports, demographic data, and they keep assuming that everybody's going to go, oh yeah, now I know exactly what to do with it. But in fact, they don't. Part of the thing that's frustrating me as the owner of Dr. Demographics is that our clients are often kind of left in the dark. They're told numbers, they're told things, but they don't understand the context of it. So I want to talk today about the process and the context. We are always going to take these things for about 30 minutes. We don't want to overstay our welcome. And there are 5 points that I'm going to make today. I want to make you understand that you don't assume that you know where to practice. Now, here's what I'm saying. Most demographic companies will say, oh, if you give me a street address, then I'll give you the data. I'll tell you what the competition ratio is. I'll tell you if there's money in the area. And the ratios are really what they're telling people. Look, everybody, that is very responsive, but not proactive. If you don't explain to doctors, for example, within a given state, how many professionals there should be for a particular kind of practice, so let's say general dentists, if you do not explain to people that with the population density, that you want to have at very least 1,400 to 1 in an area that is average, then you're not really helping them. There are some places, by the way, that you're going to have a ratio of 2,500 population to 1 provider, and in this case, dentists. And I'm going to tell you something, they'll be choking and dying. But we just looked at a practice this week that had 900 potential patients to 1 general dentist in a 5-minute drive time radius. And the place is it's gonna rock. It's doing great. But unless you understand the context of competition ratios, the people giving you the numbers aren't really helping you. So don't assume that it's an easy thing and that you're just automatically supposed to know. The reason we have these things and we offer these resources on our website at drdemographics.com is so that you'll be able to understand the context. Now, what you need is to get proactive recommendations. So very often in these little webinars that we're doing, I'll say, this is a great place to go. Look here. Now, that surprises people because you sort of think, well, Scott, you're not making any money when you do that. And the answer is that's true. But then again, it's not my information to share. It's really something for you to know. If you happen to say, Scott, I want to know where can I go in the Northeast or the Southwest or wherever that will have a good ratio. I want to be proactive and say, here are what the things to look for. intimate personal recommendations are usually done through a telephone consultation. I can't do that with everybody, but in your particular case, if I know what you're looking for, I can say, yeah, this is what you ought to do. Ultimately, I want to tell you what you should be seeking, not just where. So you have to know what's important to know. That's, again, one of those little things that frustrates me because that's not often shared. Now, here's the second point. Most companies are dealing in cliches when it comes to demographic profile analysis. And I mean by that, they'll say, oh, look, here's a favorable competition ratio. I just went over this thing about 1,400 to 1. That's a national figure that I came up with that says for the whole United States, that's reasonable. The problem is the whole United States is not in play. If you are in a specific location, a specific site, and you're looking for a particular type of patient, or you're looking at competition of a specific variety, like you got a lot of corporates, or solo practices, or partnerships, or transitional practices that are generational, that is a different kind of competition. And therefore, the ratios aren't going to be so easy to simply say, oh, I understand it. When I first started working in dentistry way back in the early 80s, the expectation was if you don't have 3,000 to 1 ratio, well, then you're going to die. But unfortunately, that wasn't based on good research. It was based on somebody who is in a dental school who said, oh, this is what it ought to be. And the same thing is true for veterinarians and chiropractors, endocrinologists, and endodontists. The ratios are not universally understood nor researched. Often what they're going to say is, oh, look, here's a place that has lots and lots of money. Now, lots and lots of money is always nice. You probably know that the highest income or the richest zip code in the United States is actually in Texas. That's right. It isn't in Manhattan and it isn't in San Francisco, but that doesn't mean that there aren't places with big revenues there. However, the demographic companies that are just throwing out numbers and saying, here's a high median household income or a per capita income are not explaining enough to say why it's good or bad for you. Quick thought. If you're in an area that the cost of doing business is remarkably high, it better be a significant amount of money that's flowing in the door. And I say this on 2 counts. What we're seeing in the United States, especially in urban areas, is lots of places that have the cost of doing business is high because of the employee cost. It may, if you have to pay an employee, somebody who's working as a nurse or a dental chairside or something, it's going to cost you a significant amount of money if they have to travel an hour and a half. You have to compensate them for that. A lot of times there is a base median household, base minimum income that the state is, requiring that employees receive that is making it impractical to go to. And that's one of the things we're saying in Seattle. It is so expensive where they're going up to $17 an hour as a minimum wage. What that means, if you have a person who's the person sweeping the floor, you're going to get rid of the person sweeping the floor and find someone who's higher paid, who's already doing something else, to be able to justify the salaries. We're also seeing lots of people who are talking about, oh, this is a place to go because it has high amounts of growth. Now, I love growth more than the next guy. Look, growth is necessary for practices, but I have to tell you too, that isn't always the case. In fact, I'm noting a lot of places that have a very high rate of churning. Now, churning means that there's not new houses or new businesses going in, but there's turnover in the population. That works just the same as though there's a lot of new residents. So knowing that is the case, the churning ratio is also sometimes more important than just a lot of new people in the area. Then there's also automated algorithms that people are using in these companies. Now, full disclosure, a lot of demographers are using a real estate database. Now, they don't understand where the numbers come from, and they don't really know how different those places might be from another, but they're able to accurately say, here's what the number is. If you're looking at automated algorithms, numbers that are generated through some kind of a system, you're going to get wrong answers. And a lot of times it's a false positive or a false negative. And so I'm just saying, look, if you are putting a lot of money into your practice or you're going to put in a lot of time, you're going to be in trouble unless you make sure you're getting the bottom line and an interpretation of those numbers. That's what I'm saying. So you see, it's not just a simple competition analysis. You have to say, what type of competition is it? Now, I'll give you a quick example. We're back at the dental thing. If you happen to be right next to a corporate practice, they're not like solo practices. They're not open the same number of days. They're not charging from the same kinds of fee schedules. But you see, a lot of times they'll just say, oh, well, here's what the competition is. What you need is a detailed or nuanced competition analysis. You also, it's nice to have growth, but you have to understand where the growth is coming from. A lot of locations are getting a lot of international migration into an area. Well, that's great, but it doesn't mean that is the population that you most want to have as a professional practice. Many of the times, the people who are coming into the area are very poor or have an ethnic or cultural imperative against the services that you offer. If that's the case, you're going to need a far larger number of people to justify the competition or the growth numbers in order to make this work for you. So that's why I bring up the point of really good market research, particularly in the area of psychographics. Psychographics are the lifestyles, and they set the value of a particular person or group of people in determining whether or not a practice site is going to work for you. There has to be a suitable characteristic for a practice model to survive. And I bring that up because there are some people who assume that all practices are the same, and they're not. The characteristics of the practice model have to be suitable for the people who are living and working in a particular area. Now, I may come back to this in a minute, but we had a problem this week where a doctor had ordered from a competitor of ours a demographic report that looked like their competition ratio was bad. And it was getting worse. And they went, oh, no, hair on fire, we can't get the loan. Now, the reason they couldn't get the loan is because the people making the decision didn't understand the nature of the statistics. In an area that is, by the way, primarily commercial, where a lot of people are employed, it could be a great place to have a practice. The problem is competition ratios are not based upon the people who are in business, employees. They're based upon residents. And some people go to the office, not from their home, but from their office. Sometimes that's due to an increasing amount of commute time. When the commute is getting longer, it's going to make everything look worse because the only people who are around, what we refer to as the daytime population, are people who work there. So you have to understand something about that. Now, I'm bringing all this up because if you look at the statistics, and I'll just throw this out, the West Coast versus the East Coast of Florida. We see a lot of people say, oh, Tampa's doing so well and Miami, not so well. Guys, that's a non sequitur. It doesn't really hold true. It isn't just a statistic. These are people, and they act in different ways based upon their lives, where they work, what they think, and how they behave. We're looking at a behavior-based model when it comes to healthcare. That's the bottom line. Now, going on, often the people who are giving you statistics have no intimate knowledge of a practice's character. And I'll just give you one quick thing. If you look at people who are measuring veterinary medicine, now the American Veterinary Medical Association, nice bunch of people, and they publish some statistics, and they'll say, here's how many veterinarians they are per person. Well, that's all well and good. Problem is, it doesn't really have a relationship to the type of people and how much they're going to spend on the veterinarian. Just knowing a statistic on the competition ratios isn't enough. Another example, by the way, pediatric practices. There are some places that have lots of kids. That's how they say, oh, lots and lots of kids. Oh, that's fine. Problem is, The difference between a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old in what they tend to need from their healthcare provider, whether it's a pediatric dentist or pediatrician or pediatric endocrinologist, is very different. So therefore, the potential of your practice, you have to know something about the character of the population and the type of practice you're in. Just to give you another example, housing type. I don't know if you know this, but if you look at the number of people who live in a single family dwelling versus a 2-bedroom apartment, it's very significant. No matter what their age is, the population per household is almost every time going to be higher when you have a single family dwelling. So therefore, you've got to know something about how many people live in a house to make it acceptable, not just the fact that there are so many houses in a particular area for a practice. Income distribution works the same way. Guys, there are some people who are crazy rich. I love crazy rich people. But it's their income distribution in the area that also matters. You see, some people don't have high income. What they have is high net worth. And we were talking about Florida a minute ago. Listen, everybody, Florida can be fantastic if the income distribution numbers work out. But sometimes they don't. The other thing is educational attainment. You know that people who are over 25, that's where they usually get these statistics, people over 25 who have a 4-year college degree or more, or not as much. What their age matters when it comes to the educational attainment. Also, how many of them have graduate degrees? You probably know this, but doctors, those who have a PhD, I'm not talking about physicians, doctors sometimes earn much less than those who have a master's degree. And knowing that just means that educational attainment is not a panacea for anything. We also want to note that there's a potential for change of demographics on a particular practice site. As the population shifts and they're different, boy, you better know exactly how those shifts are going to affect the type of practice that you're in. Now, in a lot of areas, there's gentrification going on. Gentrification simply means there's an area that has been poor and is gaining money because the nature of the people and what they're earning is changing. Good example is Harlem in New York. It used to be Harlem was poor. By the way, early on, Harlem was rich, but then it kind of went onto hard times, and now it's reinventing itself. The same thing is true in many locations. So the potential for change is going to affect what types of practices do well and what they should be offering. There's also a big difference, by the way, for those people who don't really understand practice to assume that all doctors are the same. Look, specialty practices are different from general practices. There are lots of subspecialties within specialty, but also general practices aren't quite what they used to be. Now, knowing something about the subspecialties of practice makes a big difference. And I may talk about that in just a second. Now, other thing I want you to understand is the practice potential should be based upon multivariate studies. You're not looking at a single statistic like growth or income to say, yeah, it's a good place to go. You have to look at the relative or the relationship between housing, growth, income, age, employment type, how much people are earning in a given employment type. Just because Amazon opens a headquarters doesn't mean that everybody in the area is going to be rich. Most of those jobs, by the way, are going to be blue collar. Not that that's bad. I'm just simply saying you have to know that, as it will affect the potential of a practice in that site. Another little thing I want you to understand, and I mentioned this kind of at the beginning, there's a difference between churning and growth. Churning is turnover of the population. With sufficient churning of the right kind of patient, you don't need growth. But you do have to understand who's coming in. It's the evaluation of the potential that is really hard. The other thing I want you to understand, there are some parts of the United States that are losing population. And among those are Connecticut and Illinois. They're just having a lot of people pick up and leave. New York City is losing a lot of people as well. If New York City is losing people, you have to know why And you have to know who they are. Why are they going? Most of the time, by the way, the change is based upon the housing prices, or how much it costs to live in a place. There's also a difference in how technologies are affecting a population. And LASIK surgery is a good example. I don't know if you remember the days that ophthalmologists were not really making that much money because eye surgeries weren't that big. Then LASIK surgery came into vogue, and where those practices are surviving and who's getting LASIK surgery revolutionized that. And the same thing is true of other professions, and I'll use the all-on-4 technology for dentists. Now, you probably all know that you can get a dental implant and do these all-on-4 things. And I'm going to tell you, typically people are surprised when they find that the people who need all-on-4 are often those who have a significant bone loss. These are not the sharpest knives in the drawer socioeconomically, okay? I'm not trying to make fun of them. Just simply say, those people who are going to get it are not the people you would assume are going to get a dental implant. The same thing is true of a lot of types of diagnosis that's going on. This is especially true, by the way, when it comes to veterinary medicine. Diagnosis technologies are changing who's getting care and where they're getting it. Also, as I was mentioning, the cost of living and the cost of doing business are in flux in many places. And even though there are lots of people that have a lot of money, and the example that I gave earlier was Seattle, fantastic. They have really nice salaries, but they're also keeping less as a percentage of their salary because of it. The changes in the tax codes are also really affecting where people can make it. Now, why am I going through all this? I'm doing this because I want you to understand that simply getting the numbers from someone without understanding the context of the numbers is going to hurt you. And there are a lot of people out there who are selling demographic reports and don't understand the source of the data. All right, real quick. I'm not trying to say they're not good people or not being honest. A lot of times the data is good. They just can't explain it. Now, let's assume we've got a team of people who you're working with, and I want to tell you who you're going to have to look to first. It's your demographer. Now, you may say, well, that's easy, Scott, because you're a demographer. Yes, I am, and that is true. But here's why I make a big deal out of it. If you want to know the best place to practice, you're going to have to start with the demographics of your type of practice and where you want to put it. That's the first step. It isn't to look for competition ratios. It isn't even to look for growth or money. It's to say the demographic character of the population, is it going to work for me or not? Then the next thing is we got to find a realtor. Realtors are typically local-based professionals. A guy who happens to be in the business of putting in professional practice accounts, a realtor for doctors, will understand what the size of the office space ought to be for a particular practice type, and will know what is a reasonable amount to pay given the location. So what often happens is people will ask me to do a demographic report, do the interpretation, and then talk to their realtor. And I can tell the realtor, look, here's the size space you want to go to. Here are the cross streets that will be important. Go there. And they can do something I can't because I'm not a realtor. They know the places. The other thing I want you to be aware of is the lenders. Now, if you want to put a practice in some place, you have to recognize that some lenders may be wonderful people, but they're not all selling the same thing. So to get the right lender, you have to figure out what your real estate needs are going to be as defined by your demographer. You see how the steps go. Then the other thing I also want to say is there's some places that are doing so badly as far as growth. They're just challenging. Look, if you don't talk to a broker to find out what's on the market and to find out how much people are paying for things, you're kind of losing out. So I'm a strong proponent of brokers. But often the brokers and the lenders and the realtor are working with your demographer to help you figure it out. Now, the other thing I have to say is even after the fact, if you want to be successful in practice, you got to have a person who knows how to manage the business on site. Now, I say this about consultants the same way I do realtors. often finding somebody who's local is going to be a really good idea. There are some fantastic people who are scattered across the United States, wonderful people, but it may not be enough. You see, a consultant can look somebody square in the eye and say, you're hired and you're fired. Yeah, they're kind of the Donald Trump of professional practice. Okay, now I'm going to go through something very quickly that is way more complicated than I have time to discuss. I want to talk about research themes. There are three ways of looking at demographics. There's social science, interpretive, and critical. Now, the social science people are going to rely most heavily upon hard, cold numbers, the facts. The problem is a lot of people don't understand those, and I'll bring up the statistics relating to a standard deviation. Now, some of you had statistics and you know what I'm talking about. Some people are, what is a standard deviation? Standard deviation is just how off the norm that a place might be and how its statistics are going to vary. That's the social science approach. I believe in it. It is a little more positivistic, but ultimately it's quantitative, and that's where I like to have research go. But it isn't the only thing you need to know. If you look at the interpretive demographics are where you're looking at psychographics, what people's behavior is. It's a behavioralist approach. Those two, social science and interpretive statistical analysis, are where almost nobody has a background, and that's what you need. The last thing is critical research. And not to say anything bad about critical research, but here's a fact. Power differentials are what people are often looking for. So who's winning and who's losing, who has the money, who's going to have the money, is often where critical research comes in demographic site analysis. Now, I'm not trying to convince you to do anything or another. I'm just saying, if you're going to spend a lot of money, and you are, to try to get into a good place, if you're going to spend a lot of time, and you're going to be spending at least 2 years building up this practice and getting it ready until you make the decision on where and open the doors, I'm just saying that's an average. If you're going to be spending your effort and your reputation, it is not the time to go cheap. Now, I'm going to just jump through some things real quick here and say, I recommend that if you really are trying to find a general direction, telephone consultation is the way to go. It costs $225 for half an hour, and we can talk about what the data that will relate to a location will be for you. It's not the same thing as a viability study, but it's a good way to kind of just shoot the breeze a little bit and say, how can I save myself in time, money, and effort? And that's where the telephone consultation works. You guys, I'm just about out of time. I want to thank all of you. And to thank Mike Green, who has just been wonderful in his help. Unfortunately, they've got a big snowstorm down in southern Utah. What can I tell you? If you missed any part of this webinar, please go to our website at drdemographics.com. We'll be posting it, or write to us at info@drdemographics, and we'll send you a link to this whole thing of what you just seen. Thank you so much for your time and your talents, and thank you for your friendship. I can't tell you how grateful we are for the good doctors who talk to us regularly about what we're doing. I look forward to talking to you again sometime soon. Take care and have just a wonderful rest of your day.